If you're looking for information on minority influence and how it works, you need to know what happened on August 18th in 1920. That was the day the 19th Amendment was ratified and women were given the right to vote. Again, in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed. In 2015, the Supreme Court struck down the ban on same-sex marriages. These are some of the most notable moments in American history. These moments opened up the idea of the American dream to more people. Now, of course, these changes did not happen overnight. Years of discrimination preceded these changes. Many people were jailed or even killed for exercising their rights to protest these issues and help bring equality to all people. At some points in American history, a world with same-sex marriages or the women's right to vote seemed impossible. Well, how did this happen? How did a minority opinion, like the one of people that all races deserve equal rights, win out over the majority at the time? These are the questions that Romanian French psychologist SERGE MOSCOVICI asked himself in the 1960s and the 1970s. His theory of minority influence showed the world how a small group of people could change the minds of the masses. And this video is all about that minority influence and how it compares to previous theories on majority influence. But before I start to talk about minority influence, I think it's important to talk about the theories that preceded Moscovici's work. Solomon Asch was a Polish-American psychologist who conducted studies on something called conformity. He showed how people were more likely to comply with the majority's opinion in order to fit in. Even if reality contradicted the majority opinion, people eventually conformed. It was more important to go with the group and not rock the boat. These were important studies. But this idea goes all the way back to an evolutionary psychology. See, when people lived in smaller villages or tribes, they would have to rely on the rest of the group to help with them find food, shelter, and protection. People were safe so long as they belonged to a group that would help keep them safe. Any erratic behavior or going against the grain threatened that individual person's safety. And we still feel this discomfort of being excluded from a group and the dangers of being isolated. So the process of going along with a majority opinion is known as compliance. And the influence that majority puts on others is known as normative influence. But this video obviously doesn't end with Asch's theories on compliance and his experiments on obedience. We all know that while normative influence is powerful, it is not the only social influence out there. If we were only swayed by the majority, we would never have been able to pass laws allowing same-sex marriages or give racial minorities the right to vote. Minority groups, like the Nazis, would have also never came to power. So Moscovici began to conduct experiments of his own. He challenged Asch's theories on conformity. Interestingly enough, Asch actually agreed that minority influence needed to be explored. What Moscovici found is that while compliance sways people to believe in majority opinion, another process can also occur. This process is called conversion. A minority can get people to convert to their views, but like I said earlier, this process does not happen overnight. Often, people silently convert to the minority opinion for a period of time before being vocal and proud of their views. It's important that in this video, I'm speaking of the psychological process of this idea. So, a minority movement must have a specific set of characteristics in order to be successful. Without these characteristics, the movement is likely to fail, and normative influence is likely to reign over the minority influence. So let's talk about some of the characteristics of minority influence. In order for a minority group to influence the majority, Moscovici found that they must have the following qualities or characteristics. There's 4 of them. Number 1 is consistent behavioral style. Number 2 is opportunities for systematic thinking. Number 3 is flexibility, and lastly is identification. So let's talk about behavioral style, specifically consistency and confidence. So when a minority opinion enters a discussion, it can be a little bit confusing at first. What's their message? What are their goals? What are they actually fighting for? When the answers to these questions are consistent, conversion is more likely to take place. In fact, Moscovici believed that consistency was the most important characteristic of a minority movement. Without consistency, it's easy to write off the movement as disorganized. It's easy to poke holes in the minority's arguments. See, our brains, they don't like confusion, and we're not likely to be converted to something that confuses us. So consistency is the most important part of a movement's behavioral style. In order for minority influence to take place, the movement should also be confident, appear to be unbiased, and resist the current movement and its pressure on society. Secondly, we have systematic thinking. So, as you probably know, it's very easy to go along with the majority opinion. There's tons of experiments that prove this. If everyone around you believes that something is true, you're likely not to question it. You may not dig even deeper for the ins and outs of your own opinion because no one is questioning you about your views. This is called superficial thinking. Now, one of the reasons that minority influence takes hold is because it goes beyond superficial thinking. When a minority opinion is introduced, people are more likely to mull it over, to think about it. They may debate the merits of the opinion and how it stacks up to the majority opinion. With a consistent message, it's easier for people to engage in systematic thinking. I know this all seems really complicated, but it's very interesting to me. This type of understanding can help people become more confident in their views. People are more likely to engage in discussions and actually have debates about what they believe if they've gone through the process of systematic thinking. Third, we have something called flexibility. So consistency is not the same as rigidity. In order to influence people, the minority opinion may need to be flexible in whatever they accept and what others will accept. After all, change in a nation happens usually with small steps. At the time that gay marriage was legalized throughout the United States, over a dozen states had already legalized it. People were still coming around to the idea of same-sex marriage, but all of those smaller conversions were still considered a win. Radical change usually does not happen overnight, especially with nations. If minority movements are willing to be flexible and accept smaller wins, then in the long run they're more likely to see a big win in the future. Lastly, we have identification. As we see more and more people that identify with siding with the minority, we begin to open up our minds to that opinion. If a random person on the street who didn't look like you or didn't appear to be from your city came up to you with the idea that chewing gum should be illegal, you'd probably write them off as just a weird, strange person on the street. However, if your parents maybe said the same thing, you might at least hear them out. So let's go back to the idea of evolutionary psychology. You should know humans have always had an us versus them mindset. They support and protect the members of their own group, we call them us, while pushing away the people from the other group, we call them them. Even if we don't know someone in our own group, we're still likely to support them because they're part of the us group. We identify with others in many ways. We identify with people of the same sex, the same gender, social class, or even hometown. When those similar people come to us with an opinion or an idea, because of psychology, we are much more likely to hear them out and maybe see their side of it. But this video is coming to an end, so let's wrap it up. These 4 characteristics make it easier for a minority movement to influence others. If you have a wild idea or find yourself wanting to go against the grain, it might be helpful to see how these 4 characteristics can help you change the world. I genuinely hope that you've enjoyed this video about minority influence and the 4 characteristics it takes to influence a movement. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to leave them below. I absolutely love answering questions. I also encourage you to check out the other videos in my social psychology series. I've worked very hard on creating a valuable playlist. And you can learn a little bit more about how the human mind works. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.